Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. It's Andrew Turner, founder and co-host of the London Test Automation community. And today we've got an amazing session. Thank you very much for our speakers joining us. We're going to introduce them in a second. I'm going to be talking to a couple of, you could say, tech legends from the Silicon Valley. And we're going to be talking about the future of testing. This is something we put together in November. And this is going to be the final event for this year. So glad you're all here, and thank you for joining us on this today. So in terms of the agenda for today, we're just going to go through a bit of logistics for the session, then jump into a bit of a background on the community that we're running, and we've been running for quite a few years, and then introduce our speakers. Then we're going to jump straight into this, what we're calling the Fireside Chat. And then we're going to open up the session to cover some Q&A from the audience. And then we'll do a wrap up and just talk about what we're going to be doing in 2021. So in terms of this logistics, we're going to be recording this session. We're making it available on YouTube and through normal social media platforms after the session. We'd ask you to all mute during the session so we can actually, but we'll open that up during the open Q&A and bring people that are actually going to be asking questions of our speakers actually at the time when we get to that point in the agenda. If you do have some questions that you want to post to the speakers, then please submit that through the chat button that should be at the bottom of your screen, and look forward to your participation. So if you don't know anything about the London Test Automation and DevOps community, it was originally founded by a guy called Shashi Jagtap. You probably know him. He's got a big Selenium background and then has moved into kind of mobile application development. And he now works for a very famous tech company in Silicon Valley. And I got involved with the group a few years ago, helping Shashi on speakers and generally organizing the group. We've now got nearly over 3,000 members in the group, and that's growing every month. We usually do 3 to 4 physical events in and around London, but we now obviously move that to the online kind of format. So we run 3 events this year. And if anybody's interested in speaking in the future, then please let me know, and we can talk about that, factoring that into the 2021 agenda. So in terms of our speakers today, you probably have heard or even used some of their software that they created and built over the last decade or so. Very pleased to announce our first speaker. It's Kohsuke. Kohsuke is the creator of Jenkins and was the CTO of CloudBees until something happened in the last 12 months that I'm sure you're going to talk about today. So Kohsuke, are you there? Can you come on the?
Hey.
Hi, Kohsuke.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
Great to see you. You join us from whereabouts are you today?
So I'm in sunny California in San Jose, about an hour away from San Francisco.
You lucky man. Thanks for coming. And so our next speaker is also, I think, on the sunny side of the West Coast of America. Harpreet, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you for having me over as well.
No problem. I believe you're in a special facility.
Yes. To keep the story that all Silicon Valley companies get founded in their garages, I'm actually working out of my garage. It's quite dark in here, so it feels like London, although it's bright and sunny outside.
That's good. I like that. All Silicon Valley startups should have a garage to work from initially. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I need to up my game.
So I think what we're going to do is we're going to jump out of these slides. Let's just jump out of these slides, and we're going to stop sharing. And we're going to jump into speaker view. So I suppose to kick things off in terms of this fireside chat. So I know that obviously in terms of introductions, I mean, Kohsuke, could you just explain your background to the group today and just give us a bit of a pen portrait of what you've been up to?
Yeah, so I So I guess a while back I was working for Sun Microsystems, which actually Harpreet also worked there. And then I was an engineer involved in the Java EE platform. And back then I was very prolific. So I started writing this software that primarily just for hobby. And then it started being used for work. And then that eventually became Jenkins. And I guess the next thing I know, like everyone else in the world was using it. So that's kind of how I guess really get into this developer productivity space. And I kept on that space ever since then. And now I'm still here. So that's kind of what I do.
And how many deployments of Jenkins there is in the world? I think there's a few million, isn't there? Is that right?
So I don't have the up-to-date number, but the last time I was tracking a few years back, we are counting about like 200,000 servers around the world. And then, Jenkins is a server-side software, so I don't know how many users, etc., but that was the number. So at one point, I did the calculation, like how much power, the electricity it's using and like its global implication to the a climate change, and it was not great. So I'm trying to fix that here by making.
So you're obviously developing eco-friendly software now in Launchable, but we can talk about that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So thanks for joining us. So Harpreet, I know that you've been kind of causing some damage in the software industry as well over the last 10, 15 years. So what could you introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, so I think Kohsuke mentioned we started together at Sun Microsystems. I was an engineer there. My pet peeve was that Sun had fantastic engineers, but we could really never monetize. So I actually moved into product management to see how to build like businesses to help engineers succeed. And I found Kohsuke, and I felt like Jenkins was sort of the future, and we started sort of working together. And subsequently, I was at CloudBees, where I built the Jenkins/DevOps business as head of product. So I was there for about 8 years. My small claim to fame in Jenkins is I started the Jenkins World Conference. I feel proud about it. And more recently, I was at Atlassian as the head of product for Bitbucket Cloud. So so I've been in the developer productivity space for a while as well.
Wow. And I think you said that you're responsible for this Elon Musk inspired product called Jenkins X. Is that right?
No, I don't think so. It's so funny. Yeah. So Jenkins X naming. I like to think I was the guy who introduced it. I don't quite remember if it was iPhone X or SpaceX that quite introduced it. Maybe it is SpaceX, because I certainly did not introduce iJenkins as a tool.
Well, if you get a bit of brand rub off from Elon, powered by Elon Musk, that's not a bad thing, I suppose.
That's not a bad thing, yeah.
So he's a fan of Elon Musk. So now that I think about it, yeah.
Sorry.
You are a fan of Elon Musk as well.
Oh, I am a fan of Elon Musk. Yeah.
So I suppose that what that triggers in my head was about, given you've had some very, very successful experiences, building great software. I suppose, what was the kind of light bulb moment? What was the epiphany moment to do what you're doing now? Because I believe you've kind of just in recent time just launched something brand new.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Kohsuke.
Yeah, all right. So I guess there are a number of things, but okay. So while I was at CloudBees, being a Jenkins founder kind of opens so many doors for me. So whenever I was traveling, I make a point of asking around if I'm in this city on this state, if there's any software development team who's interested in meeting me. And that usually leads to, people take me into their office and we talk about the challenges and how they develop software. And I did quite a few of those. And one of one of the learnings that I got from it is, if you're only going to the conferences and hear people presenting their best side, their brightest side, you get to paint one set of pictures. But in reality, the kind of struggles and challenges that people are having is surprisingly more mundane or like understandable. And then so like the QA, the testing in general kind of came out for me as a theme, like a common theme. And it made sense that as a universal problem because everybody does QA. And then also like I felt like, I had the same problem in this Jenkins project that's been going on for at that point, like 10 years or so. Like a lot of test cases accumulated, like a long testing time, even just to make a one-line change. It takes about an hour to run the whole unit test cycle. And then like a code review begins. And then if somebody make any edits, then that another hour has to be waited before the thing passes and I get to merge the change into the master branch, right? So yeah, it made sense. And then also the kind of final bit was I saw the paper that came out from the Facebook that was talking about them having the same challenges. Obviously like at much larger scale. And they deployed these like a machine learning based solutions, and they reported a pretty good impact. And then when I looked at the paper, I was kind of dumbfounded that how simple-minded what they did. And then even that simple one made a huge impact. So to me, that felt like alignment to the stars. Like, okay, personally, I resonate with this problem. Like clearly somebody solved this problem. So like, I don't see why I wouldn't be able to do it. And then there's a lot of people out there who seems to have the same problem. So why not? Yeah. So I guess that's for me kind of like a key build up.
Sounds like you had some personal pain. You could relate to it. And yes, when you went to see your kind of CloudBees and Jenkins customers, were they did they say that as well? They were relating to that as well. You getting some good feedback from them?
Yeah. So and that's kind of like what I was trying to speak to earlier. Like when they I didn't, let's say this problem that I had in the Jenkins project, I don't think I talked about it in like any public space, right? Because it kind of felt like somewhat embarrassing. Or like a mundane, like it's not interesting. So I feel the same is when we are talking to the customers or since Harpreet talked about the Jenkins world. When you go to these conferences and hear practitioners talk about how they have been successful in driving changes, this and that, those things don't usually come up. It's like for them, I guess they think it's not interesting enough to talk about. They must think. But when I kind of go interview them, like I get a wholly different story. So that's how I think about it.
Yeah, I mean, we're all going to realize testing is very sexy as a topic, isn't it?
I think these are actually like a very important missions, but somehow, but I guess it's most things in the world is kind of like that, isn't it? Like, there's so many people putting in heroic work, but most of the time it goes unnoticed. And that's when, that's sort of like a sign that we are doing the good enough job. And like, it's not, the world isn't blowing up because of like on the other hand, on the few occasions that we do fail, then like it makes a spectacular news. So I guess right now, the one that I just saw this morning is like a cyberpunk. Like, some of our engineers in your own team, like I was really looking into this video game. And then they came out and they got delayed a few times and they finally came out like a week ago and the quality is a mess. And so they had to, like, I believe they had to start refunding people. So that's, that's everyone else being very successful except for the QA, or like, I guess it's not the QA, but the software development failing to meet the quality. And then that's the only time when we get on the news, right? So I feel like,
yeah, but if it's cyberpunk, that means that Keanu Reeves is going to be their QA tester, isn't it? So it's going to be fine.
Yeah.
So what about you, Harpreet? Then what's your what was your trigger? I suppose it sounds like you obviously worked together at CloudBees, and obviously then you went over to Atlassian. But you're obviously having a cup of coffee or a espresso cappuccino or something, and you said, what was the trigger from your side?
For me, it was like we were. In the last decade or so, we've been talking about DevOps transformations and we're thinking about getting people to do continuous delivery and so on. And the stories were very consistent that, teams go on these long sort of transformations in the hope that they are going to improve something on the other side. And it's really hard, right? And it's a long process. And when I went to Atlassian, as I was talking to customers there, I was really pushing the Atlassian DevOps story as well. I was talking to customers, and my realization was like, there are not many people who are doing it because, or who are doing it are like struggling again because of these long, cycles. And this example predates sort of COVID, but it was like you're sick, you go to the doctor tells you that's fine, buddy. What you need to do is hit the gym, eat right for the next month, year, and then on the other side you'll feel good. And you go, dude, I just need a shot right now. I'm in pain. And that's sort of what my realization was. That's where the company folks were. The second thing that sort of fell in and around at the same time was like, as you're doing these, transformations, as we were sitting across and talking to people, you realize sales and marketing is very data driven, but engineering isn't as data driven as you would like. And me as a past engineer and Kohsuke as an engineer, we felt like surely we could up the game beyond sales and marketing and bring these data-driven practices and machine learning practices to companies today, right? And so the confluence of that and Kohsuke's insights around the QA space seems to be where people are struggling in their pipeline. People have moved beyond building these pipelines, and now there's focused on these long test cycles. Seemed like a perfect confluence for us to come in and do something here, and that's sort of what got us together. And while we were talking about this, it's not cyberpunk, but you remember something called a Boeing 737 Max, which kind of had a problem with testing. And all this was going on while Kohsuke and we were discussing. And I looked at that and I go like, wow, if Boeing cannot do testing, like and there's the problem here that we think we should, that I thought we could go in and address.
That's great. I mean, I think it's my friend's a very famous online travel company that begins with E and ends in A. You probably have heard of. They said to me that testing is a necessary evil, and I suppose I was talking to Dave Farley about this the other week actually about there's been all that focus. It's 10 years now since the Continuous Delivery book came out.
Yeah,
I think it was August 10th. I think 2010 it came out. And he celebrated with a glass of wine. That's what he told me. That's what he told me in September. But if you think about, there's been all that stuff about devs and ops, but then the test teams have been kind of left behind. They've not been really supported, I suppose. So, I know that obviously there's a lot of organisations who have built testing software. But I suppose the interesting thing with what you're doing is starting to bring to the point you're saying data with testing, and provide that analytical perspective on it, which makes it a bit more interesting.
Kohsuke has a talk around this called data-driven DevOps. I think that's a pretty interesting one where he was talking about how data and DevOps needs to come together. I actually don't bucket these three separately. Right, testing is not quite different as you talk to sort of engineering teams. Right, the visual that I have in mind is like, either it's like a tax, everybody thinks that they have to pay this tax. And the other visual that comes to my mind is from that movie. It's a cartoon animated movie where the sloth is actually sitting and heading at the DMV. It's like that visual where you're sitting at the DMV waiting for the test to go and keep going before you can merge stuff. And Kohsuke talked about that. And you really can't have continuous delivery without quality. And we were just maybe a month back, we were talking to somebody in Silicon Valley who was sort of making this point that churn, from his perspective, he's a very well-known VC, and he talks to a lot of companies. He mentioned churn is the affliction that is hitting software companies today. it's no good to like really deliver stuff fast if you cannot deliver that at quality, at high quality. And then quality has to be part and parcel of the process, as opposed to, thinking of this as DevOps and testing or dev test ops, just part and parcel of the flow.
Well, I suppose we pick up that point that Kohsuke touched about the kind of developer productivity. So you got you spend all this time hiring rockstar talent, and then if they're waiting around to get the feedback from the testing, then if you have that kind of frictionless process, then you've got a risk of is it churn? You've got churn risk around your developers if if you don't fix that kind of process. Like if you've seen that any customers you've been talking to, has that come up as a problem?
Yeah, actually there is. We were talking to a couple. So there are a few themes that come about. So just to be clear, the churn that I was talking about was the churn on customers. But one of the common questions that we ask our people is like, do these long development cycle times get in your way? Like, is developer productivity a thing? Is developer happiness a thing? What I found was like developer productivity has kind of become like a sort of a soft cuss word where like, developers think that managers are holding a whip and trying to drive them faster. But really the hat that, these guys are wearing, the managers are wearing is like happiness. It's like if you are sitting in there and you spend a day waiting for your tests, and we were talking to this team, the managers thought that their developer productivity is about impacted 20% because of long test cycles. And you talk to the engineers and they go, no, it's really around 50%. We come back home in the evening, we put, feed the kids, and we are back to looking at the bills to see whether the tests succeed. We're just unhappy about this, right? And that team actually cuts across, company sizes, small, big, team sizes, the types of applications that are being built. And so to your question, there is definitely a problem around churn in terms of developers. And you bring, a developer goes away, and it takes a while to hire the next one, make the next one productive, and so on and so forth, and it takes months. And that's something that people don't want to deal with.
Yeah, you described the testing. I guess you described somebody calling QA as a necessary evil, which kind of feels like a little negative view. But I think another perhaps a little more positive way to look at this is it's like a seat belt. Like you need as a developer, like in order for me to go faster, like to deliver software, I rely on the testing to catch the mistakes, instead of like me extra careful and diligent to try to use my own eyeballs to find the problems. So I think in that sense, I think that the faster we try to go, the more importance of the QA, the seatbelt, it actually only increase. But therein also lies, I think, a common challenge, which I think is it's also too easy to focus on if you're a seatbelt, it gets too easy to focus on your work. Your goal is improving the quality when the goal is to go faster. So often, and then this kind of goes back to what Harpreet was saying earlier, but us not really relying on the data and numbers. So the right optimization target is like how much quality we get out for the cost of that, which is the time or the effort spent, or the resource expended to run the test. So finding that optimal balance seems like an optimization problem that's should be better left to computers instead of us manually trying to figure out where is the right balance. So that's kind of what leads into what we are trying to do.
Yes, just to qualify, by the way, the person that's made that comment at that famous travel company was actually a product manager. It wasn't a developer, and it wasn't a tester. So I suppose you've now got together. You've launched this. You've brought to the world this new business called Launchable, I believe. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Launchable Inc. Actually.
Okay, Launchable Inc. Don't forget the ink.
Yeah.
So what have you found in the time since you've launched? What stage are you at? What have you found on your journey so far? What's been the interesting insights and maybe surprising things that you didn't know about before, and maybe great things and maybe things that you didn't anticipate. Anything you can share on that?
Yeah, before we actually do that, I realize we have quite set the stage on like what we are doing, right? So Kohsuke alluded to it, I alluded to it. So our sort of key insight is that, we look at the tests and we determine, what tests to run and what tests to run in the right order to find the risky sort of bits earlier, right? And if we did that, we think that we can give the signal to the developers faster so that they can make progress. A very easy way to think about this is if you have, say, 1,000 tests, they run in some order today, and usually it's random order. If the 900 test failed, right, the question is, why did the developer wait for the entire 1,000 to run? Two, why did we spend time waiting for the 900 tests to fail? Why did we spend infrastructure costs waiting for it? And so, the picture that comes in mind is developers really are trying to push this change through, and they're waiting on these tests. Perhaps not exactly waiting; they've now gone to reading Reddit or in a meeting somewhere or something. And where we come in is based on your history. We have a machine learning algorithm. We look at this thing and say, okay, for these changes that have come in at this particular point in time, you have to run 900 tests first and the 950th second and maybe 832nd third. And we give that, list back to the team. And so the net effect of that is that if you're doing things right, within the first minute or 2 or 5, your test would fail and the developer is in the flow. He does not need to do any productivity switch, can make the changes, go fix it. And thereby sort of, our hope, and we're starting to see the numbers around it, is dramatically increase the cycle time for development teams. So that is what we do. And so,
so it's kind of reducing the wait time. The wait time that Kohsuke was talking about a bit earlier. It's kind of like get that fast feedback loop to the development team and the engineering team.
Exactly. And if you go to launchableinc.com / sort of how it works, it kind of, lays out how we are approaching the problem. As Kohsuke said, we were inspired by what Facebook did. And so it's somewhat similar, but sort of you can see what it does. And then that leads to a couple of pretty interesting use cases. One is like you reduce the cycle time, and you can bring this in sort of development flow. The other area here is that you can sort of look at heavy tests like integration tests and smoke tests, where they've been sort of traditionally run later in the cycle just because they're heavy, right? Ideally, you want all of these tests to run all the time, but that's not what happens. And so what we can do is we can actually put a box around these tests and say, well, if you want some high confidence, we'll choose, say, 10% of the tests. Or if you want to time box this, we can give you the test back. And you're essentially moving that risk left, right? So you can now bring those tests and run right in your dev cycle. So a good example of this would be for some of the prospects that we're working with, we kind of get the 90% confidence signal within running 10 to 20% of the test. Right, so your time dramatically reduces, and you get that signal much earlier, and you move the risk left. So I know I kind of went down this path before, to answer your question, what surprised you so far?
And
so
before you
I've been doing,
I'm going to throw in even one more thing, which is, so if you're looking at this from developers, it primarily manifests as getting more feedback more quickly, which is great. There's the other side, if you're on the DevOps team, somebody in my role, running Jenkins for the team, then what this looks like is actually you're sort of increasing what I think of as a test productivity. They have a fixed amount of computers or a test beds, or often if you're in the embedded software company, the testing capacity is limited, or at least it's costly. Right, so it makes sense to try to get, if you're gonna spend 1 minute of a hardware to run tests, be it on the cloud or on physical machines, then it's good for you to try to maximize the amount of useful information you get out of it. And that involves like a running test that actually produces some meaningful results. Like if a test is always passing and never fails, it's actually not producing any useful value, right? It's just wasting CPU time. So what you want to know is like a test that kind of ideally fails or changes the behavior depending on the code change. So, I try to often think of it as like condensing the orange juice so that for the same amount of testing time that you run, you get more signals. So that I think directly translates to like a lower cost or more testing capacity, and that can be turned into running more tests. So it's all goodness.
I wonder why there was like a lemon or an orange on some of your graphics that we shared.
Now,
it's like squeezing the lemon or squeezing the orange, making orange squash is the new testing paradigm. That's good.
Yeah, we don't want to squeeze people; we want to squeeze oranges.
No, so thanks for explaining that. So I suppose yes. I mean, following on from what you're saying is the problem that your hypotheses and the why you start to explain that. And I suppose I mean, I suppose as a follow on to that was trying to understand what you've found is because obviously you can draft a hypothesis with a tower around your head, in an ivory tower, but then it gets really real when you go and work with customers and work with small, large, and maybe you go and work with Boeing or something. Yeah, so like big use cases, big testing windows, big testing teams. So I suppose that was the thing. The next thing I was going to try and understand from yourself is what are the insights and the things that have surprised you and things that have made you happy. Yeah, because we want to make people happy. And then maybe things that haven't made you as happy that you've still got to do going forward. So anything around that kind of the real kind of in the kind of war zone out there in the field.
Yeah, so I'll take the first shot at this, right? So some things that didn't surprise me. Let's start from there. The hypothesis itself, in terms of like our team struggling with these long feedback cycle times, our team struggling with like what test to run, right? It's surprising. It's held up surprisingly high. Like it was like as Kohsuke mentioned, he's talked to developers all around. These are mundane problems, and you talk to people again and again, and it's you see the patterns going, and teams are struggling with delivering these, and there are no good solutions out there. So this is great on us. The stuff that actually surprised me the most was like sitting in Silicon Valley, you think like continuous delivery, Kubernetes, microservices have taken over the world, all over the place. Everybody's using it, and
drinking the Kool-Aid. Yeah,
and it's that, and you talk to people, and they're struggling, right? They're struggling with monoliths. Yeah, they want to go to microservices, but it's not on the roadmap for the next few years. And it was kind of somewhat of a reality check in, like, oh yeah, the world's different than what you think from Silicon Valley, and so that was another piece. That was the most surprising for me.
You're kind of dealing with technical debt and lots of legacy and lots of integrations to do. Is that when the architecture are complex?
Yeah, that is the right way to put that. And they're dealing with all of this while there is like this sort of pressure of these new startups coming in, right? Who are not encumbered with these legacy things, who can jump onto these new technologies and drive these things. And if you're a fintech company, if you're competing with a new fintech company, you still have to respond, right? And how best can you do that? So there's it's almost like a frog sitting in a pan that's getting slowly boiled, right? That's the visual that comes to mind. Like that's the pressure that they're feeling. So that was a surprising bit for me. I'll pause and let Kohsuke talk about it.
So I guess just taking like a different angle. So because my difference of like a test that was too long is like an hour, right? Just because like that was like testing time for Jenkins. And what I was surprised in talking to like in Launchable was people's what like a depth in which humans could tolerate things, or like their expectation changes, and then how intolerable they become. Like I talk to people who have test turnaround time is like 3 days, and they're okay with it. Or like I have people who like a test taking just 20 minutes, and they could stand it. So there, I guess like I suppose like once humans are, these are all projects with a long enough history. So like after a while, I guess you just get used to it. Just like, now I'm getting used to working from home, which was completely unthinkable a year ago for me. So I think it's good that it shows the resilience, but it's also bad that like you kind of take things for granted and you don't know what you're missing in some sense. And so that was a surprise. In the sense, I guess another way to look at the same surprise is like, I used to think this is a kind of problem that only manifests, like a largest of the software projects, but it turns out that even in the small shops with, like I said, the 20 minutes turnaround time for testing, these people actually feel this pain as well, because I guess they remember that when the test was only taking 10 minutes as opposed to 20, now it's like a double. I think it's that feeling of like, oh, this is getting longer. I think that breaks people. So that was an interesting discovery for me, human psychology.
Yeah. The other thing for me, since you asked, about the size of the prospects, and you mentioned that lately, was when we started off, like there were two hypotheses, and we both come from the Java world. So we felt like, we are going to talk to Java companies and like, the Mavens and the Gradles of the world. And as we talk to people, we realized like, no, the problem is pervasive. It doesn't quite matter which language, which testing tool, which testing stack. And the people who are in our, who are talking to us today, it's a diverse set of tooling that are talking to us. So it's pervasive across. And the second thing for me was like the size of the company as well. Was like, I sort of thought like it's going to be large and extra larges who are going to talk to us. But it's, as Kohsuke said, there's somebody talking to us. We're trying to move their dev cycle from 20 minutes to 5, and they're on the smaller side, and that matters. And finally, for me, the big thing was like, we wanted to see like how, small can we get? Like, do we require a lot of tests? Do we require a lot of, things to learn? And surprisingly enough, we don't quite need that. And there's a question here is like, why did we take the approach of machine learning for prioritizing tests, and how much data in terms of historical executions you need in order to get benefits? I'll let Kohsuke answer that. I'll just tie this to my point. There's like surprisingly low amount of tests, but like, being run often. Right. So it's kind of speaks to some sort of maturity of the organization where they are, further along their testing journey and, their CI journey, where they are trying to automate. They have automated the pipeline and they can run more often. So those are some of the surprising signals to me.
Mm. I mean, it's interesting because if you just step back from this topic, though, if you think about machine learning has been out for quite a few years, and testing obviously has been out there since software development started. I mean, your research, obviously you mentioned Facebook, but your hypothesis, you said that in your research, nobody had done this before. They hadn't combined these two practices together. Is that the kind of unique thing that you've come across?
I guess it's actually quite contrary. I think enough companies have done it, but for most companies, like it simply does not make sense to do this on their own. Like it's only at the side of the Facebooks and Google where it can be justified to spend your own engineers' time, or spend their data scientists' time to work on this. And then whereas for most of the rest of the world, like, this is just one of the building blocks that doesn't really contribute to their core value. Like this is not something they should be building. And then for me, like it's a very similar situation when I started working on Jenkins. Like everybody had their own CI systems in house and they are often proudly maintaining it. But, that's not what they are selling. So like when I was able to produce something that's, generally broadly useful for many people, the problem is this solution these guys are building is like they're all hopelessly tied to their internal solution. And that is actually true with Google and Facebook. Like everything they produce is so built on top of their own stack and totem poles. Like there's no hope that they can produce something useful outside. Whereas I feel like I know a thing or two about building like a generally useful thing in this space. So that's, to me, is like the new angle, what I bring to the table.
So what you're saying is your purpose is try and bring like an industry standard, like you did with Jenkins, to this kind of space by offering a kind of truly cross-industry, cross-size of organization way of solving this problem.
I'm trying to democratize this practice, basically.
Right. Yeah. So I see we've got a couple of questions actually from Mr. Clark. Mr. Richard Clark, do you want to come on and ask your questions of Kohsuke and Harpreet? Let's get interactive. Well, hey. Oh, look.
There we go. Andrew. Hi, guys. Good to meet you.
Welcome to see you.
A couple of questions. I'm in the testing space myself, not surprisingly. I think most of us are. I was really interested that you took the approach to use machine learning for prioritizing tests. Yeah, I hadn't seen that approach before. It's quite refreshing. But how much data would someone typically need to provide before you can start to get benefits from that learning, from that test history?
Yeah, so I mean, that's the boundary of that is something we also trying to discover ourselves. You know, like there's, I mean, at the intuitive level, it seems to like have, you know, it can. We think it's like a correlate with the size of the test, like amount, the frequencies, like a side of the code base, and all that stuff. But so far, I guess the way, so it's been surprisingly. The impact is surprisingly bigger for a relatively small amount of data, and then I don't really have a good like explanation of this. But one way I think of this is, if you think about it, like the order in which we are running a test is basically random, right? It's like, you know, some tool is going to scan the directory, list all the files, and just execute those one by one in the order they found, which is really like basically like a no better than the random order. So I guess that what I think about it is like any intelligent ordering is almost obviously going to be better than the random order. And then that impact alone is pretty substantial. And then from there is just like a slow, steady upward trajectory. The more we know about these different behaviors, that's going to incrementally add to it. But in order to see like initial impact, what I'm finding so far with the teams that we work with is like it really doesn't need all that much data to start seeing some impact.
Okay. So I was kind of
to sort of get somewhat specific. I know Kohsuke has answered this from a technical side, so I'll answer from a product management hat perspective. What we're seeing, so in the last 6 months, we've been in this phases where we handheld and brought in some customers and learned from their data to exactly answer those questions. So we typically kind of get around to the point where within 4 to 6 weeks, we get to a place where we can learn enough to start making predictions. And as we start sort of rolling this out further and further, we expect the time to go down. We don't quite know how down it would go, but like that's what we're seeing today.
Okay, so are you applying each customer you work with, you're learning something new about patterns that you're applying, or is each customer's got their own data set?
So we train models for different customers differently for now. And like one of our original hope is that there should be some similarity, let's say, in all the Ruby on Rails projects, just because the common convention is how things are laid, etc. So over time, I'm hoping that we'll be able to pick up those more generic traits that sort of cuts across different customers, but we are not there yet.
Okay. And how do you handle the fact the test cases themselves are rarely static? So if I've got a failing test, the first thing I'm going to do is either fix my code that I'm testing, or it might be a bug in my test itself. So how do you identify and know whether the test itself has changed rather than the source code?
So it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't. But the good, since I guess we just need to statically find more failing tests and try to pack them earlier in the execution than later. So all in all, so we do expect when, various changes So we are not trying to statically determine with the certainty that, oh, this test is going to fail or it's going to be meaningless. Like we're just trying to see, I think this test is probably more likely to fail this time. And if he misses it, that's fine. Because like, that's the name of the testing. Like we run, I don't know what's the average failure rate for people. It's like if you run 100 test cases and catch one error, it's like that's probably a good day for us. So
I've got one more question, which is actually I was interested that obviously a lot of people using AI and ML for other aspects like locator creation, self-healing tests, etc. What are your thoughts on those other uses of AI? Is that something else that you're looking to explore in the future and provide sort of services for, or is this your bread and butter now that the test execution? I just wondered what your opinions were on those other, often not AI, often not using ML techniques.
Yeah, so clearly, like keeping the test up to date and like kind of reducing the maintenance cost is like a key problem for many people. So I know there's a number of companies in this space, and I'm actually personally like not really super keen on that. So I'm happy to let that fought by these people. The sort of like a next, but I'm not thinking this predictive test selection as the thing for us. It's actually for me. So for me, my interest is like, this is for me, like a key thrust vector for me is that this is a continuation for me to Jenkins, where, we have a lot of people who have lots of tests already running, producing data at scale, but most of these data that's coming out from their software development process is simply thrown away. Like maybe developers looking at the test failures, like at most, or sometimes they don't even do that, right? As we all know. I feel like there are so many other uses for that. If you intelligently process this raw data that's coming out of this QA effort, we can use it. I believe we can use it for a number of different purposes. And so that's for me, like my key interest. Like I'm focusing on people who already are somewhat ahead in this like a testing practice, and then show they turn that into value. Whereas this test automation AI is like they're focused more on people who don't have QA, like don't have tests. And so for me, it's a different problem. It's an important problem, but one that's not for me at the moment.
Yeah. So to walk down into more specifics from where Kohsuke is saying, in this side of the house, like so. I see this as like two problems. One is not enough tests, so you need to generate those tests and you can use AI. And then you have a problem where you have too many tests and not enough signal. So that's sort of the second part is where we are focused in. And to make it specific, like we talk to customers who are talking about flakiness of tests. That's a problem. We talk to customers who have, QA teams, and we've now just talked in this conversation about devs and making them faster, but you have QA teams that are struggling with things that break down and trying to figure out like who do we reach out to, like what changes made these kinds of things. Those are the kinds of things that we think we'll tackle next once we have this solution in the hands of customers.
Thank you. That's all for now.
That's great.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Richard. So just following on from Richard's question, I suppose one of the things that I suppose I've observed as well is that given your background as well, is that you obviously, you're now co-CEOs of a tech company together. So I suppose, to switch it from the business side to the kind of the more personal side, I suppose, one of the questions I got for you about what have you learned about yourself since you become, a CEO of a tech company? Anything you can share on that?
Yeah, sure. So maybe I'll start. So I guess, well, I mentioned one, like, that I can work from home is like for me a complete discovery. Like I just couldn't concentrate. And then so sometimes on the weekend, just because I needed to do slides, I headed to office. Now here I am, like working from home all the time. But with that aside, I guess like for me, what I'm still trying to learn is like being both humble and like also confident at the same time. That I used to think like those things are kind of in conflict, but I'm sort of starting to see that they don't. And then so that's the it's harder, it's easier said than be done, but like that's the kind of thing that I'm discovering, like how, or like you can be both humble and be confident about what you're doing at the same time. So that's something I think about.
So staying grounded.
Yeah, I guess, because sometimes, like, I mean, you see those like people in the two extreme, right? Like some people who just like know it all and they don't seem to listen to other people. And one thing I learned in this open source community was it brings in certain axes, they bring a very diverse set of people, like people who work in the different parts of the software industry, developing different kinds of software. And they all bring like a new perspectives to the table. In case of Jenkins project, that was in the form of plugins. And they solved the problem that they didn't even realize that existed. And then collectively, like we built something great. So that to me, like I taught the value of like humility. Like you shouldn't assume like the innovation happened elsewhere, and then that's also by design. But it's also not like you wanna, when you're trying to drive something, like let's say, be it company or the project or the open source project, you should trust some of your own instinct, because you've seen a lot of things, and then you have this as a leader in the project or the company, you have unique ability to rally people around your cause, and it's often that rallying, even if the direction you're pointing to might be a little bit off, it's the fact that you are rallying people, that does matter, and that it takes some convincing of people to do. So I feel like having both is actually both important, and that's sort of like what I do today.
It's like hearts and minds and being a cheerleader now.
Yeah, exactly. So
get the pom-poms out.
Yeah.
So what about you, Harry? Is there any view from you on your tenure as a CEO? What have you discovered about yourself?
So in some respects, it's sort of some of the challenges remain the same as sort of head of product back at Bitbucket or earlier. But what I realize is how much I really enjoy about thinking how, what culture to build, and, how sort of to get ourselves productive, but not in terms of like just delivering more, but like working on what's important. And so there's like, I think I may have gone a little overboard where like spent a lot of time, producing these internal documents on how we should think about how we should collaborate, how do we, work, and so on. So I really enjoyed sort of building up, setting the foundations of that culture way more than I thought I would. So that's and that's the discovery for me on like, on the people side of the house. Like that's what I enjoy doing. Maybe not get the pom-poms out. So an example is like, I really think about deep work. I got tired of, jumping from meeting to meeting in most organizations. And I said, like, I think we need a deep work culture. And, 3 days of a week, we don't have meetings. We pack meetings, twice a week. And the other time you sit down and do work. And it was just so shocking to see how much you can actually deliver when you have like a day to think about a problem. Things that took you months could be done faster. So I enjoy, I find, that piece enjoyable. And I'm more and more actively running sort of quote unquote sales and marketing side of the house. So sort of more than the product side of the house than in my past. And I'm enjoying it, trying to figure out like, who do we talk to, what resonates with people. And that's been really enjoyable for me.
Yeah, I don't know if you call it the sharp end, but yeah, it can be sharp.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. Thanks for sharing your personal views on that. It's always fascinating to get people's view. I think to your point about the people and the culture, it's incredibly important. It's kind of vision, mission, purpose, people. What's the strategy around that? So I suppose we call this Fireside Chat the future of testing. Yeah. So I suppose I can't let you go without at least giving us some kind of predictions. And obviously we're now on the December the 16th before Christmas, an early Christmas present to everybody that's on the call, and obviously anybody that's watching this after we've done the recording. So I suppose what are you seeing as being the big themes and any predictions you would like to share with the group today?
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, all right, Kohsuke.
Okay, so I'm gonna speak the geek, and he does his thing. So I guess one picture that I want to plant in the head of the people is like how the physics experiment evolved, right? Like, if you look at this like a particle physics, it's essentially almost like indistinguishable from statistics. Like you can't, like a single data point doesn't really tell you anything. It's only in the aggregate, right? So I feel like when the amount of data or the activities scale up, like, these problems start to take a different shape. So I feel like, the operations are farther ahead in this domain. So you really, you hear people talk about the cattle versus pets, and like this, the monitoring company deploying machine learning, and this particle physics is further extreme. But I think the QA is also like, basically following a trend. So if I make a food of myself by predicting a future, I think we're going to be looking more like a test as more and more like a statistical behaviors. Like, imagine like instead of trying to solve every single flaky problems, like which we can't, like what if we can deploy the power of statistics to try to filter down the noise level and then just get the signal out? And I think that's the kind of the world that we are heading to.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, I think I agree. I think some of the questions coming in as well. We've got a few more to go. So, Harpreet, any view on that? What would be your crystal ball input?
So I actually have a blog that will land in the next few weeks, I think, on Tech Week, and so I'm the fool who's doing some of those predictions. But I'll start with the most obvious, where me and Kohsuke actually bet our futures on. Right? It's like we had this hypothesis that data-driven DevOps and more data to drive DevOps is going to be the key. And within that, as sort of AI and machine learning will start becoming more and more important. So we truly see that happening, right? Which is like you have all this data that was falling by the wayside. That needs to come in. The tools need to start get smarter. Right, so those are two obvious ones that stand out for me, right? So even within those, if I think about the specifics, we talked about the two categories. I think there is a space for these test generation tools, because you do have these two types of problems. I don't have enough tests, and I have a lot of tests. On the don't have enough tests, there are a lot of companies out there. I think Mesmer HQ, Mabel, that kind of approach I think will become more and more popular. And on the not enough tests, we hope that we are one of the leading ones that set the pace there. But if I actually move a higher altitude level, I think what we've seen in the last 5 to 10 years is like people have just got to the point where they now have like their Jenkins pipelines or their Circle CI pipelines, and those pipelines set up, and now they're sort of looking at how do I make this better, right? So automation of tests, I think, is going to be we see that culture coming up. We're talking to some teams who are like, we really want to work with you, and we are in the process of automating tests. So that's another one that comes up. And the last bit, because I like culture, I think it's this notion of continuous quality that's going to pop up. Right? It's like quality, kind of going back to our first comment about dev, ops, and test. I think it needs to be just part and parcel of the entire process, right? So whatever continuous quality means in that world, I think that's where we are headed towards.
Yeah, I mean, as I saw an article by Elon Musk saying that every board of directors should focus on making their product better. And given so many different businesses now, their product is actually a tech platform. So I suppose building quality in is pretty important, and making sure you test it properly before you release it.
You just can't get your customers to test your software. Right? like, I think that time's gone.
Exactly. I mean, I think Mr. Menzies, I think Mr. Menzies has been posting some questions. Do you want to come and ask Kohsuke and Harpreet your questions? I think you've got some questions around user experience versus testing code. Do you want to pop on the podium, so to speak? Off mute.
Oh, there we go. My only challenge is I need to bend down.
I like your hat. Nice hat.
Yeah, it's my Red Bull Formula One hat. I've decided that Hamilton's getting far too much recognition and praise, so I'm going to go for the underdog at the moment.
Okay. So, what would you like to ask tonight, then, Mr.
Well, I'm struggling here a bit, Andy, because as you can see, to get in my camera of my desktop, I'm having to bend down, which is hurting my back. But kind of makes it a bit more like a fireside chat, though, doesn't it?
Sure that.
I'm just, I'm intrigued. I mean, obviously, I get the whole idea of machine learning. I absolutely get the whole idea of AI and machine learning, because it's been an integral part of how Eggplant has differentiated itself for a good number of years now. Eggplant, which is now part of Keysight Technologies, as I typed into the chat. And that's an organization very well versed in test and measurement, a $4.3 billion company, no less. But it always sounds to me like everyone's talking about testing the code, which I think is, really not very important anymore. I don't think that the code, does it work, does it complete, is anywhere near as important as testing the experience the user has. We had our friend from Provar on earlier, which is an organization that's predominantly, I'm sure they do other things, but predominantly testing Salesforce. Salespeople don't use Salesforce quite a lot of the time properly because the experience is so god-awful. They scroll down a meter of screen real estate and avoid 200 fields that people don't put information into. We're not capturing that 360-degree view of the customer that was intended because the interface is so awful. Most people.
So are you saying, Andy, then it's looking through a different lens? Are you saying so you're looking through the user end, the user of the actual application rather than the developer? Is that what you're thinking in this question?
Yeah, exactly. Because the word churn was used earlier, but in the context of developers. Churn in the context of it being a metric that's utilized to help run and monitor the business is absolutely critical. And there's a whole bunch of other KPIs, not least of which EBITDA, et cetera, et cetera. But these are all influenced or correlated to user experience. If your user experience as you interact with your bank on the app, on the mobile phone is bad, you change banks. If you can't buy a product because the field isn't on the screen in the right place on a particular device, you don't buy from that company. So test is about ensuring that there's quality, which I concur with, which is a consistent message throughout this talk. But the consequence of user experience influences these negative issues, the metrics that I'm talking about. So it's all great, it's all cool, but I'd like to see more of a focus on testing through the eyes of the user, the lens, as you said, because that's...
Yeah, I don't quite disagree with what you're saying, that there just definitely should be that's an interesting lens to look at from, like what is the user doing, right? How is the user interacting with stuff? And people are writing tests, Selenium tests and so on and so forth for something like that. This is where I think, as we were talking, like the Mesmer HQ and the Mabel guys are working on and generating those tests. And they're actually going even a step further, is saying like, let us generate the test for you, which a user would have done. Now, where I sort of disagree with is it's not important to test the code. I think it's the code that backs everything up. So if you're able to automate and test those better, this will result in improved user experience to end users. A user experience on the bank is not just somebody, clicking sort of drop down boxes. It is also how fast my bank is responding to me. It's also like the fact that my money is being transferred at the right time. And then there's code written for that, and that needs to be tested. Right. So there's a place for that too. Right.
Yeah,
So
I think agree with that. I probably put that way.
Yeah, I think it's great that well, there are a number of the sub programs in the QA, and obviously one of them is like finding or the coming up with the right layer to insert the testing such that it's both easy enough to test and maintainable, and then it produces useful signal and all that. So, I guess industry have found a few of those, starting from as low as unit test. And, Andy, you were talking about this, a testing at the user experience level, which I think is, it'd be great. I think it's great to make that easier. I think a lot of benefit in having, we just need a whole lot more of these layers and the tooling to make them easy.
Yeah.
So I'm all hats, all kudos to your effort. And where I feel like our effort are complementary is because what we are helping is just leveraging the fact that some tests are more useful than others. Whatever layer it is for the given change, or for the current, for this moment, this day. So that asymmetry in the ability to produce signal by different tests, that's what we use to optimize. And that makes us workable with any testing at any layers. There was a question earlier who was talking about the contract testing. So it's the same story. We can work with any layers. And that's what, in my mind, I mentioned about the Jenkins being a generic platform, that's what makes me make this a generic platform for us, for me, is that it's kind of indiscriminatory when it comes to what are the test layer that it works with.
Very cool. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks for that question. So any I think we've got a few. I think Dennis, are you okay now, Dennis? I think you were posting some questions a bit earlier, and I think some people on the chat have kind of helped to answer that question. Is that okay, Dennis?
Maybe more or less. I don't know. Maybe I just missed something, but it's still there are different conversations going on. By the way, I actually disagree with the previous speaker about that the code is not important. I think you need feedback from multiple levels and layers, and if you have good quality around your tests around your code, it's easier to refactor, it's easier to react to customer feedback, and it's easier to adjust your UX based on that. So you have to get feedback from multiple layers. I don't know that the code is not important anymore. I think it's still very much, at least from where I'm sitting and what I'm seeing in my area, it's still very much one of the most important things. My other questions are it was confused, and Kohsuke was trying to clarify that it is about ordering of the test, but if you change the order, you still have to wait an hour until you kind of commit your one line of code. Or is it so am I missing something? So we do prune some tests so they can get the feedback faster? Or is it about to get the feedback of failure faster? And if everything's successful, then it's fine. Because if I made a pull request and someone commented on a code review and said, hey, you need to change this variable, I still have to wait an hour until I get back feedback if everything's fine.
Yeah, and I think I understand what you're saying. So the picture I want you to think about is, so imagine the gnome in the cave came up with this optimal order to run the tests. And if you run them all to the completion, then your total test time is not going to change. But even in that case, the chance that you're hitting the problem sooner is going to increase. So that's one point. Often, right? I mean, if you're I'm sure this happened many times to you. It's you made a change, you run the test, and you had a 3 tests failing because, and then you slap your forehead and I had to add this one line change, and you rerun the test. You kind of hope those 3 tests would run in the beginning because you want to get that. If that fails again, you want to know that. So that's like knowing the failure sooner, even if the tests are still going, is actually useful. And then two, so imagine back to this optimal order. Like what that does is like, most of the tests that are going to likely fail is packed in the beginning. So like the question I pose is like, what's the point of running all the tests to the completion? Right? And let's say if this is a pull request, your goal, you're not trying to ship this code to the customer. So your goal is like, in any case, you're only getting so much quality at that point. Like you haven't run the integration test. So there's always some subjective bar on like how good is good enough to get into the master. So imagine like if you're 20% into the testing and statistically we can tell you like 95% chance that your change is good. Like is that, I think it's worth asking, maybe that is indeed good enough for like going into the master branch. Like is there extra 45 minutes wait worth those additional 5% chance when there are so many programs that are already slipping through your unit tests and getting into the master branch. So that's what I meant by those programs actually very similar. Like if you have the right order, magical order of the tests to run, then you can use it both like, to get the feedback sooner, but also to subset the tests.
Okay, that makes sense.
One way I think about this is I actually put these in like different parts of the testing phases to just bring out the contrast, right? So let's assume that you are that company that is trying to reduce your testing feedback time, your unit test feedback time from 20 minutes to 5 minutes. And you're in the pre-merge side. In that case, reordering would be good enough because the developer would find the 3 errors that Kohsuke was saying within the first 2 minutes, and he can keep, working and iterating through things while the rest of the tests run. Now, if you sort of take that maybe later in the cycle, you have integration tests that run for 3 hours. And if you could subset those 3-hour tests to 10 minutes and run them earlier, as part of this cycle, you would get a much better signal on the quality of the software. So the key being is like you can choose which approach to use where, and this is going to the subjective piece Kohsuke was saying.
I think the thing is, I think Dennis is very happy now. Are you happy, Dennis?
I'm happy with his answer, but it wasn't my experience. What I usually like when I usually do, I would do exactly the same thing. I work with PyTest a lot, for example, for any kind of test, whether unit test, integration, or system test. I would use Python for that, and I would use like when I rerun test, I would always say rerun the failed test first. So I was already kind of in that mindset. And I do TDD a lot as well, so I would for me, the feedback cycle is super important, and I would filter test myself potentially. So I'm maybe don't have as many tests to. However, I already experienced like I have to wait for half an hour for my pull request to be merged, even though I change one line of code, right? And I know that I run tests myself locally already. So it's maybe the problem I don't have yet. So I just wanted to clarify exactly where we're going with this discussion.
Yeah, maybe when you wait for those tests, you can go on a kind of virtual coffee with Kohsuke. You see, maybe to do that, so he'd be waiting for the test to complete as well. Boom, boom. Anyway, so thank you very much for those questions. I don't think there's any other questions come through. So I was just going to say, I know we've been running for just over an hour and 20 minutes now. So. I suppose my final question was about anybody interested in knowing more about what you guys are doing, what Kohsuke and Harry are doing, and John, the rest of the Launchable team. What's the best way of getting hold of you guys and sharing the love?
Yeah, so we are on launchableinc.com, and where we are today is we are bringing a number of prospects / customers in an early access program. So you can come in, sort of connect to us, try the software. We'll handhold you through that. So there are a few things. One is you could always tweet at tweet at us. We love to carry the conversation forward. That's fantastic. 2, you can send an email at info@launchableinc.com, and we can get in touch with you. But that's the most easiest one, and that's the last one, is to go to launchableinc.com/invite, or just go to launchableinc.com, and there is a get an invite button, and you press that, and somebody on the team will sort of reach out to you. And, the conversation is going to look like, what problems do you have, and see if, we are a fit to sort of work together.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for that. So yeah, I mean, I think all I was going to say was thank you so much for coming on today's Fireside Chat, although we didn't really have a fire to sit around, but maybe you can do that in the future.
I do have a space heater next to me, so it feels pretty warm.
You see, you were hiding that. There was like a virtual fire. You're the hot one, right, over sat in San Francisco, and we're all freezing in London. No, thank you, Kohsuke. Thank you, Harry, for coming on today's session. It's been a really good chat, and thanks for all the questions from the floor with Richard and Andy and Dennis. And I hope you've learned something. I think the whole point of this community is for people to learn, and really appreciate some rock stars from the Valley to join us today, and some rock stars from London, Richard and Andy and Dennis. So just to finish off the session, let me just have a look. Just have a look here. So some of the links that Harry and Kohsuke shared with me. So for future reference, one of the things we were talking about before we actually ran the session was, are there any books on that? Because we normally recommend some books to people who attend this session. And sounds like there's no books out about this topic, so maybe that's an opportunity in 2021 or in the future. I think these are some of the links that the guys have just mentioned. I think there's a white paper here as well, which is great. So in terms of what's next, we are working on a 2021 schedule for the group. If, as I said a bit earlier, if anybody is interested in speaking in 2021, please let us know. We'd be happy to talk to you. And so I suppose just to finish off, thank you very much for coming on today's session. It's been a pleasure to have you on, and please keep safe and healthy. I know that we've just gone into Tier 3 lockdown again in London. And I know it's not been a great year, but let's try and hope that 2021 is going to be a lot better. So once again, thank you very much, Kohsuke. Thank you very much, Harry. Thanks, John, from Launchable, and thanks for your questions from the session tonight. And have a wonderful evening or wonderful day wherever you are in the world. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.